Organizing a speedrunning marathon, even a small-scale one, is hard. From rounding up runners to scheduling everyone, to promotion, to getting mods, to assigning hosts, to determining streaming or restreaming methods, and if you're doing a charity marathon, picking a charity and setting up how to donate and organizing incentives and setting goals, and it's a ridiculous amount of work. And often you're just trusting that everyone is honest and responsible enough to follow through on their roles. Part of marathons also means being prepared, particularly if the schedule gets too far ahead or behind, or if a runner has to pull out or reschedule for whatever reason. This is why, if you've ever seen the back end of a freshly posted marathon game list, or watched it get announced, you'll sometimes see a second list of runs outside of the accepted ones. These are backup runs. They're like understudies for parts in a play, but with time slots instead of specific games. Backup runs are an unsung staple of making sure most marathons go smoothly. But what happens if your marathon runs out of backups? SNES Superstars is a recurring online marathon that focuses solely on Super Nintendo games. It's organized in part by a longtime runner of various NES games, Feasel, who keeps showing up at various GDQ events, usually in a staff role, though he's not nearly as active in speedrunning as he was a few years ago. I've made it to a couple of these, usually showing off a game compatible with the Super Scope. However, for my first appearance in 2017, I wound up doing a total of 3 runs. The catch is, only one of those runs was planned. I was scheduled to run Battle Clash, which went alright. But after some time, instead of the marathon getting behind schedule, which is a common marathon problem, this marathon was getting further and further ahead of schedule. It was to the point that they needed to add more runs to the schedule to bridge the gap, since some scheduled runners wouldn't be able to do their runs because of how far ahead things were. Backups were more loosely arranged for this marathon, so the organizers asked on Discord if anyone had runs that could be plugged in, and I and a few other runners threw out a couple ideas. One of them being Yoshis Safari. That would be my second run. Oddly enough, a couple hours later, a different runner mentioned that if needed, they could run Yoshis Safari. I figured that would be enough to help out, since Yoshis Safari usually takes close to 40 minutes to run. However, later on the marathon was still ahead of schedule. They had another runner who would need to have their run pushed back, and needed another game to fill the now vacant time slot. When the organizers took suggestions for runs, Yoshis Safari was not the only game I suggested. There was another game which was something that I'd only started seriously trying to get times for within the past couple days leading up to the marathon, and only had loose speed tech/routing in mind. You can imagine my surprise when the organizer messaged me about said game, asking for a time estimate and category name. Truth be told, the time I gave him was about 2 minutes below the first run I'd ever attempted of it. I figured I could only improve my time, considering the number of mistakes in the initial run. If it sounds like I didn't really know what I was doing, that's because I sort of didn't. But because I really wanted to help out, I did it anyway. So my third run of the marathon was Tinstar. Tinstar is an anomaly in that it's one of the only SNES games that can be played with either the controller, the Super Scope, or the SNES mouse. It's a game I picked up during a time when I was tracking down every game that worked with the Super Scope, To give an idea of how random a suggestion this run was, I didn't know if I was going to play using the Super Scope or the mouse when I suggested it. The controller is way too slow. Don't play Tinstar with a controller. Ultimately, because I'd already done a pair of Super Scope runs in a relatively short time frame and my shoulder was starting to hurt, I went with the mouse. Small problem. I didn't have the SNES mousepad, and the mouse cord wasn't long enough to set it on my computer desk. Instead, I grabbed the first hard, flat object I could find, set it on my lap, and used it as a mousepad. In this case, it was a copy of Hyrule Historia. Don't worry, there was a proper mousepad over the top of the cover. As far as speed tech goes, there wasn't a whole lot to talk about during the run. That'll happen when the majority of the game is rail shooting. Not good considering the run's estimate was 50 minutes. There was one thing I did, and it had to do with how I used the mouse. I would move the mouse with my right hand, and had 2 fingers from my left hand on top of the left mouse button. Since I was already used to the Super Scope setup, in which I held up and aimed the Super Scope with my right hand, and used the fingers on my left hand to hit the fire button, this awkward sounding use of the mouse actually felt natural to me. The only risk with this strategy was accidentally hitting the right mouse button, which pauses the game, though I only did that once in the entire run. The good news is that I did end with a faster time than my previous attempt. The bad news is that I wasn't fast enough to finish under estimate, reaching the final boss with about 20 seconds left. And with how fast he is in these shootout sections, I wound up being under the estimate by about 3.5 minutes. Even the run didn't go exactly how I hoped it would. I was realistic about it. This was a run that I never expected to do for a marathon. Even when I suggested it, I made clear that it was something I didn't have much practice with. I'm just fortunate I didn't go too far over the initial estimate, and the marathon ended up getting back on schedule after I and a couple other people slotted in extra runs. Oh, and because I know someone out there is thinking it, there were no other runs of this game at the time, so I guess you could say, technically, by the most basic definition, this was a world record I got during a marathon. I might actually commit to saying that, if only to help get over the Dragon's Lair SNES run from AGDQ. But that's a story I'm saving for the next episode.